November 23rd, 1944, a cold morning at Rhine-Hopstun airfield somewhere in Germany, and inside a drafty hangar sat something that would change everything the Germans thought they knew about aerial warfare. It was a captured American P-51 Mustang, olive drab paint scarred by flak, serial number 41733, still visible beneath hastily painted German crosses. This wasn't just another trophy aircraft. This was a puzzle that terrified Berlin because pilots kept reporting the same impossible story. American fighters were literally tearing German aircraft apart in midair, not with cannons, not with rockets, but with ordinary machine guns. Wilhelm Hartmann, chief engineer, circled the Mustang for the third time that morning, running his hand along its smooth aluminum skin, trying to understand how this single fighter had killed so many of Germany's best. 2 weeks earlier near Munster, this exact aircraft had been flying at 20,000 feet when its engine quit, and the American pilot had glided it down into a turnip field where Wehrmacht soldiers pulled him out at gunpoint. Now Hartmann had orders straight from Berlin. Figure out what made this machine so deadly, and figure it out fast. By dawn, 12 of Germany's finest aeronautical minds had crammed into that freezing hangar, bringing measuring tapes, calipers, notebooks, and slide rules, ready to dissect every inch of this American marvel. They had examined captured Thunderbolts before, even a few Lightning fighters and earlier Mustang variants. But this was different. This was a D model, the latest version that had been appearing over the Reich in growing numbers since June, the one turning experienced Luftwaffe pilots into statistics. Klaus Weber, an armament specialist from Messerschmitt, opened the gun bay doors and let out a low whistle that echoed through the hangar. 6 Browning M2 machine guns lay nestled in the wings like sleeping serpents, 3 per side, their barrels angled to converge at a point 400 yards ahead of the aircraft. 12.7 millimeter, Weber muttered, converting the American 50 caliber designation in his head. Same as our MG-131, but look at this ammunition feed. He pointed to the distinctive metallic links that seemed to run forever deep into the wings. 400 rounds for the inboard guns, 270 for the middle and outer pairs. That's 1,880 rounds total. Mother of God. A young mechanic named Ernst Müller, barely 19 and fresh from technical school in Dresden, leaned in closer. His brother's Messerschmitt had come home 6 months ago with half its tail section torn away by American 50s, and Ernst had never forgotten the sight. But sir, our fighters carry cannons, 20 millimeter, even 30 millimeter. Surely those are superior to machine guns, aren't they? Hartmann was already shaking his head. He had flown 109s himself before the crash injury that grounded him permanently, before they made him an engineer instead of a pilot, and he knew better. Come here, boy. Let me show you something that will change how you think about firepower. He led them to a work table where he had laid out ammunition samples side by side. German 20 millimeter cannon shells next to American 50 caliber rounds. Visual evidence of 2 completely different philosophies of aerial combat. Yes, our cannon shells are bigger, more explosive. One good hit can absolutely destroy a bomber engine or blow off a fighter's wing. But look at the rate of fire. Our MG-151 fires maybe 700 rounds per minute on a good day. These Brownings, each one fires 800 rounds per minute, and there are 6 of them firing together. That's 4,800 rounds per minute, 80 rounds every single second, all converging on one single point in space. The mathematics of destruction hung in the cold morning air like a death sentence. Müller picked up one of the 50 caliber rounds, an armor-piercing incendiary, its tip painted blue and silver, and the bullet itself felt surprisingly heavy, dense, like. It meant business. I still don't understand, sir. It's just a machine gun bullet. Just a bullet that travels at 2,800 feet per second, Weber corrected quietly, with a striking energy of 13,000 foot-pounds. And when 6 of them hit the same spot within a tenth of a second, he trailed off, remembering the reports from pilots who had survived encounters with Mustangs, and there weren't many. Hartman climbed onto the wing and settled into the cockpit. The bubble canopy was revolutionary, giving the American pilot 360-degree visibility with no blind spots like German fighters had, and his hands found the control stick where the gun button sat prominently placed under the pilot's thumb. The K-14 gun sight was unlike anything in German fighters, a computing sight that automatically calculated lead based on range and target wingspan. The pilot just had to frame his target in the reticle, twist a dial for approximate range, and the sight did all the complex mathematics of deflection shooting for him. "Look at this," Hartman called down to the others. "The convergence is factory set at 400 yards, but it's adjustable. The pilot can change it based on his personal preference or his specific mission. And see these switches here? He can fire just the inboard guns alone for long-range, conserving ammunition, all 6 guns for medium-range maximum destruction, or select specific pairs for different situations. It's not just raw firepower, it's precision application of that firepower, controlled lethality." Dr. Friedrich Bauer from the Reich Aviation Ministry had been taking notes silently in his leather journal, thinking about the reports that had been crossing his desk for months now. German fighters simply disintegrating under American gunfire, not exploding dramatically like when hit by cannon shells, but literally coming apart like they had been attacked by some kind of airborne chainsaw. "We've been thinking about this completely wrong," he said quietly, his voice carrying weight that made everyone stop and listen. "We see our cannons as superior because one shell can destroy. One perfect hit ends the fight. But the Americans aren't trying for that one perfect shot. They're not gambling on precision. They're creating a continuous stream of destruction, a literal river of bullets that tears through anything in its path. And they're doing it with such volume that missing becomes almost impossible." The hangar doors suddenly opened, bringing a gust of bitter November wind and Hauptmann Erich Zimmermann, one of the very few Luftwaffe pilots who had engaged Mustangs multiple times and somehow lived to talk about it. His left arm was still in a sling from his last encounter 6 weeks earlier, and he walked straight to the Mustang like a man approaching a dangerous animal, placing his good hand on its cowling with something between respect and fear. "You're wasting your time with all these measurements and calculations," he said flatly. "I can tell you exactly what those guns do because I've seen it. I've felt it. I barely survived it." October 7th near Hanover. I was flying top cover for a bomber interception, spotted 4 Mustangs climbing from the west, and we had perfect altitude advantage, perfect tactical position, everything by the book. I dove on the trailing American, lined up what should have been a perfect cannon shot, and then his wingman rolled inverted and fired, just a half-second burst, maybe 40 rounds total, but they all hit my right wing root, and I mean all of them. Not random impacts scattered across my aircraft, but a concentrated stream that cut through the main spar like a circular saw through wood. The wing folded up at 400 miles per hour. The whole aircraft started disintegrating around me, and I barely got the canopy open and bailed out before the whole thing came apart. He moved slowly along the Mustang's wing, running his fingers over the gun ports like reading Braille, remembering. Our pilots trained for precision shooting, one perfect cannon shot that ends the engagement. But the Americans trained for something different entirely. They trained for volume combined with accuracy. They put a cone of bullets exactly where they want it, and they hold it there. Just keep the trigger pressed until whatever they're shooting it literally stops existing. And against our fighters with their light construction and vulnerable inline engines, it's absolutely devastating. There's no defense. Weber had carefully pulled one of the Brownings from its wing mount, surprised at how easily it came free, and the weapon felt elegant in its simplicity, purposeful. 80 pounds each, he noted, examining the construction. But look at this design. No unnecessary complexity, no over-engineering, just mechanical perfection, pure function. Our MG-131 weighs almost the same, but fires significantly slower and requires more maintenance. And these barrels, they're specifically designed for sustained fire without overheating. You can hold the trigger down, and they just keep firing, keep cycling, keep killing. The young mechanic from Dresden was examining the ammunition belts more carefully now, tracing the pattern with his finger, and he suddenly understood something that made his blood run cold. Sir, look at the sequencing. It's not random loading. They're using specific patterns: tracer, armor-piercing, incendiary, armor-piercing, tracer. It repeats. Every fifth round is a tracer showing the pilot exactly where his stream is going in real time. The armor-piercing punches straight through our aircraft skin and engine blocks like they're made of paper, and the incendiary rounds set fuel and hydraulics on fire. It's a scientifically designed pattern of destruction. Hartman climbed down from the cockpit, his engineer's mind racing through the implications faster than he wanted to accept them, because the American approach was so fundamentally different from German military thinking. Instead of seeking the theoretically perfect weapon, they had taken a good, reliable weapon and simply multiplied it, synchronized it, made it work in devastating concert. It was mass production philosophy applied directly to aerial combat, and it was winning. He thought about the massive factories in Detroit and Buffalo churning out Mustangs by the thousand, each one carrying 6 of these Brownings, each Browning capable of firing 27,000 rounds before needing any major maintenance. The scale was overwhelming. There's more, Bowers said, flipping through a captured technical manual they had found in the aircraft, and this is what really frightens me. The harmonization pattern, they don't just make all 6 guns converge at a single point. They create an oval pattern roughly 3 feet by 6 feet at convergence range. Any fighter caught in that kill zone takes hits from multiple angles simultaneously. It's not trying to put all bullets through one hole. It's creating a zone of guaranteed destruction that makes multiple critical hits mathematically certain. The temperature in the hangar had dropped another few degrees, their breath now visible in the morning air, and Hartman walked to a blackboard they had set up, began sketching tactical diagrams with chalk that squeaked in the silence. Let's think about this from a combat perspective, he said, forcing himself to be clinical. A Bf-109 spots an American bomber formation and begins its attack run. The escort Mustangs immediately engage. Our pilot has maybe 3 seconds of actual firing time in a head-on pass. That's enough for perhaps 30 or 40 cannon rounds if everything works absolutely perfectly, if nothing jams, if his aim is flawless. The American pilot has those same 3 seconds, but he puts out 240 50 caliber rounds in that exact same time window, even with only a 50% hit rate, which is conservative. That's 120 impacts on target. The kinetic energy alone, Weber added, working his slide rule frantically, 120 hits each carrying 13,000 foot-pounds of energy. That's over 1.5 million foot-pounds of destructive force delivered in 3 seconds. It would be exactly like getting hit by a locomotive at full speed. Young Mueller was standing by the Mustang's tail now, examining the control surfaces, still trying to find hope somewhere in this analysis. But surely our fighters are more maneuverable. Can't we simply outfly them? Use our superior handling to avoid their fire? Zimmerman laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it whatsoever. Outfly a Mustang? Maybe at low altitude if you're very lucky and very skilled. But up at 25,000 feet where the American bombers actually fly, the Mustang absolutely owns that sky. It's faster, it climbs better, it turns tighter, and with that bubble canopy, they see you coming from literally any direction. You cannot bounce them the way we use to surprise thunderbolts. They see everything, always. The inspection continued methodically through the morning, each new discovery adding another layer to their growing understanding and their growing dread, because the Mustang wasn't just about the guns. It was a complete integrated weapon system where every component worked together. The laminar flow wing design gave it exceptional speed and range. The Packard-built Merlin engine was a license-built copy of the British Rolls-Royce, but manufactured with American precision and superior materials. The drop tanks let it escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back with fuel to spare for combat. Every single component had been optimized to create not just a fighter, but a long-range air superiority platform that could deliver those 650s anywhere in the Reich and dominate. When it got there, Dr. Bauer was examining the gun camera mounting, and this detail bothered him almost as much as the weapons themselves. They film every single engagement, he noted, not just for victory confirmation or propaganda, but for systematic training improvement. They study every burst, every hit pattern, every miss. They're turning air combat into a quantifiable science, continuous improvement through data. Hartman thought about his younger brother, shot down 3 months ago over Frankfurt. The combat report said his 109 had been hit by Mustangs from the 357th Fighter Group, and multiple witnesses on the ground described seeing the Messerschmitt suddenly start trailing pieces. Then the wings separated. Then the fuselage broke apart. Then it exploded. All of this happening within perhaps 2 seconds total, and his brother never even had time to reach for his parachute release. We need to completely rethink our entire tactical approach, Hartman said finally, his voice heavy with the weight of truth. Adding more armor won't help us because those 50 caliber armor-piercing rounds will punch through anything we can physically carry and still maintain flight performance. Heavier armament won't help because we already have cannons and they require getting close enough to use them. Better engines won't help because we're already pushing our airframe designs to their absolute structural limits. We're out of options. He paused, looking at the captured Mustang with something approaching genuine respect mixed with dread. They found it. The Americans have found the perfect balance point of firepower, operational range, speed, reliability, and most importantly, manufacturing quantity. And they can build these faster than we can possibly shoot them down. The mathematics don't work in our favor. The Reich Aviation Ministry had been desperately pushing for wonder weapons, jet fighters, rocket interceptors, flying wing bombers, miraculous technology that would turn the tide. But standing in this freezing hangar, examining this one captured Mustang in excruciating detail, Hartman understood the brutal reality with perfect clarity. The war in the air wasn't being lost to some kind of inferior German technology. It was being lost to superior application of good, reliable technology. The Americans hadn't built a perfect theoretical gun. They had built a very good practical gun, and then installed 6 of them on a very good practical aircraft and trained their pilots to use them with absolutely devastating efficiency. And they did this thousands of times. Weber was back at the ammunition storage area, carefully counting rounds and doing mental calculations. You know what truly frightens me most? This is just one single aircraft. According to our latest intelligence, they're building these at a rate of 15 per day. 15 Mustangs means 90 Browning 50s, means 28,000 rounds of ammunition entering the war every single day. The scale is incomprehensible. The young mechanic from Dresden had been absorbing everything in silence, trying to process it all, and finally, he spoke quietly. So when our pilots report that American fighters are literally tearing our aircraft apart in midair, they're not exaggerating for effect. They're not suffering from combat stress or misperception. They're accurately describing what's happening. These guns are cutting our planes to pieces with concentrated machine gun fire. It's worse than that, Zimmerman said, staring at the Mustang. They're doing it from ranges where our cannons aren't even effectively accurate yet. Those 50s maintain precision out to 800 yards. Our MG-151 starts dropping significantly after 400. They're killing us before we can even get close enough to fight back. We're dying at distances where we can't hurt them. By noon, the technical team had filled 3 complete notebooks with detailed observations, measurements, and increasingly pessimistic conclusions. They had photographed every component from multiple angles, traced every system, measured every dimension with Germanic precision. But the fundamental question remained unanswered, or rather the answer was too simple and too terrifying to fully accept. How did 650 caliber machine guns completely shred German fighters that had ruled European skies just years before? Through volume of fire, through muzzle velocity, through precision harmonization, through American industrial mass production ensuring every single Mustang had identical quality, through systematic training that taught young pilots to put steel on target rather than hoping for one golden cannon shot, through reliability that meant the guns actually worked when the trigger was pressed. Hartman stood outside the hangar in the cold afternoon, watching contrails form high above as another massive formation of B-17s headed east into Germany, their Mustang escorts weaving protective patterns around them like shepherds guarding a flock. And from 25,000 feet, those 650s could reach down and touch any German fighter that dared rise to challenge the bombers. The mathematics were absolutely inescapable and completely merciless. Each Mustang carried 1,880 rounds. A standard squadron of 16 Mustangs carried 30,000 rounds. A full fighter group of 50 aircraft carried 94,000 rounds. All 50 caliber, all armor-piercing and incendiary. All delivered with mechanical precision by pilots who had trained thousands of hours specifically for this mission. The technical report Hartman wrote that evening would be clinical and focused on specifications and measurable capabilities. But the real message he wanted to convey was simpler and infinitely more terrifying. The Americans had figured out how to industrially mass-produce death and deliver it at 2,800 feet per second anywhere they wanted. They weren't trying to build the ultimate theoretical weapon. They were building good, reliable weapons in absolutely overwhelming numbers and teaching farm boys from Kansas and factory workers from Detroit how to use them with terrible efficiency. And it was working perfectly. 3 days later, the captured Mustang was carefully loaded onto a railway flat car bound for the Luftwaffe testing facility at Rechlin, and Hartman watched it disappear down the track, knowing with absolute certainty that dozens more identical Mustangs were crossing the English Channel that very morning, their wings heavy with fuel and ammunition. Their young pilots scanning the winter sky for German fighters to methodically tear apart with those 6 terrible 50s. In his coat pocket was a letter from the front lines, from a pilot in Jageschwader 26 who had written just a single haunting line. "We see the Mustangs coming and we run. There is no shame in this anymore. There is only survival, and even that is temporary." The winter of 1944 was settling over Germany, bringing short days and long frozen nights. But Hartmann knew the real cold was coming from the west, carried in the aluminum bellies of American heavy bombers and in the wings of their fighter escorts. 650 caliber machine guns per Mustang, 1,880 rounds per aircraft, all of it destined for German aircraft and the increasingly young men who flew them. The mathematics of air combat had been permanently rewritten, written in bullets and measured in bodies. As December arrived, bringing snow that covered the evidence of war temporarily, the Luftwaffe adapted its tactics out of pure desperate necessity. They formed special anti-bomber units that avoided the Mustang escorts entirely, striking only when the Americans were turning for home, theoretically low on fuel and ammunition. But even these measures were temporary solutions to a permanent and worsening problem. The Mustangs kept coming, more each month, their pilots getting better through combat experience, their tactics continuously refined through that systematic analysis of gun camera footage. The 650s that had initially seemed like such a crude American solution to the elegant problem of aerial combat had become the definitive signature of American air power, not elegant, not theoretically sophisticated, just devastatingly brutally effective in actual combat. Hartmann eventually transferred to jet development programs, working on the Me-262 that Hitler kept insisting would somehow turn the tide and win the air war. But even as he worked on these genuinely revolutionary aircraft, he knew the fundamental truth that nobody wanted to acknowledge. Jets might be faster than propeller fighters, they might have superior performance, but they still had to land eventually. They still needed fuel that Germany no longer had in sufficient quantities. They still needed experienced pilots who were increasingly impossible to find and even more impossible to train properly under constant American bombardment of training facilities. And when they did fly, when they did manage to engage, those patient 50 caliber machine guns were waiting, ready to saturate the sky with lead, ready to find that one critical hit that would send the miracle weapon tumbling to earth in flames regardless of its revolutionary jet engines. The captured Mustang at Reckland became something of a legend among Luftwaffe test pilots. They flew it extensively, studied it obsessively, learned everything possible from it. But learning and effectively countering were completely different things. You could understand perfectly how 650 caliber machine guns worked in concert and still be torn apart by them in actual combat. Knowledge didn't stop bullets traveling at 2,800 feet per second. Understanding the convergence pattern didn't help when you were caught in it. When your aircraft was disintegrating around you in a symphony of metallic impacts that sounded like industrial hammers on steel, until the sound suddenly stopped because there was no more steel, no more aircraft, just falling pieces in the wind. By February 1945, Hartmann was in Berlin, watching the daily bomber streams from the reinforced concrete safety of a flak tower. The Mustang escorts were visible as tiny silver specks weaving around the massive bomber formations, occasionally diving on some unseen target far below. And he knew exactly what was happening in those steep dives, 650s speaking in mechanical unison. Another German fighter ceasing to exist, another pilot either dead or parachuting into a Germany that was rapidly running out of safe places to land. The technical superiority the Luftwaffe had enjoyed in 1940 when they dominated the skies over France and Britain was now just a fading memory. The revolutionary jets were too few and arriving too late. The experienced pilots were mostly dead, and the war in the air had been decided by the simplest possible equation. 6 machine guns times thousands of aircraft equals absolute air superiority. The last entry in Hartmann's personal technical diary, found decades after the war ended, was remarkably telling about what he had learned. The Americans understood something fundamental that we completely missed. In modern industrial warfare, the perfect is the enemy of the good enough. While we endlessly sought the theoretically perfect weapon, they built thousands and thousands of good, reliable weapons and taught their young men to use them with terrible efficiency. The Mustang 650s aren't an elegant engineering solution, but elegance doesn't win wars. Mass-produced lethality does, and they had both. The spring of 1945 brought the end that everyone knew was inevitable. American fighters roamed at will over Germany, their 6-gun batteries silent only because there was literally nothing left worth shooting. The Luftwaffe that had once ruled European skies was reduced to hiding aircraft under trees and forests and flying desperate suicide missions with half-trained boys who had maybe 10 hours of flight time. The Mustangs had done their work with mechanical efficiency, their reliable 50s. Systematically turning the cream of German aviation into aluminum scraps scattered across the Reich. In May, with Germany in complete ruins and the war in Europe finally over, American technical teams arrived at Rechlin to reclaim their captured aircraft and examine what the Germans had learned. They found the Mustang that Hartmann had so carefully examined, still bearing its German markings, still mechanically perfect despite months of hard testing, ready to fly home. The American lieutenant who inspected it was only 23 years old, from Ohio, and he had flown Mustangs operationally with the 352nd Fighter Group. He ran his hand over the gun ports the exact same way Hartmann had done 6 months earlier. 650s, he said to his crew chief. Nothing fancy. Nothing complicated, just 6 good reliable guns that fire straight and true every single time. That's all it took to win the air war. The crew chief was older, had been maintaining Mustangs since 1943, had seen them come back from missions with battle damage that should have killed them, had personally loaded millions of rounds of 50 caliber ammunition into wings over the years. That and boys willing to fly them straight into hell. He added quietly, don't forget the pilots. They flew the Mustang back to England that week. Its American pilot genuinely amused to be flying a Mustang with German crosses over the same territory he had fought through just months before. And below them Germany lay utterly broken, its cities in smoking ruins, its aircraft factories destroyed or captured. The autobahns that had once carried troops to conquest now carried refugees fleeing west. The fields that had once grown food were cratered from bombs and littered with crashed aircraft. German mostly, but some American too, because even 6 perfectly harmonized 50 caliber machine guns couldn't guarantee survival in the terrible mathematics of aerial combat. Years later, when historians studied the air war over Europe in detail, they would naturally focus on the strategic bombing campaign, the 1,000-plane raids, the systematic destruction of German industry and infrastructure. But the pilots who were actually there, German and American alike, knew something different. They knew the war was really won in those brief, violent seconds when a Mustang pilot pressed his gun button and 6 streams of 50 caliber bullets converged on a point in space temporarily occupied by a German fighter. No mystery, no magic, Just mechanical efficiency multiplied by thousands of aircraft and tens of thousands of young men systematically trained to deliver that efficiency with deadly precision, repeated until there was nothing left to shoot. Wilhelm Hartmann survived the war, ended up working for the American occupation forces, helping them understand German aircraft development programs. And in 1950, he immigrated to the United States, got a job with North American Aviation, the exact company that had designed and built the Mustang. His first day at the factory, they took him through the production floor, showed him the assembly lines now building F-86 Sabre jets for the Korean War, and he stopped at the armament section, watched workers installing 650 caliber machine guns in the nose of a Sabre, the same guns, still 50 calibers. He asked his American guide, genuinely surprised. The engineer just shrugged casually. They work reliably, why change? And that, Hartmann suddenly realized, was the answer he had been seeking since that freezing morning in Germany in 1944. The 50 caliber Brownings worked. They were reliable, mass-producible, easily maintainable, and consistently lethal. While German engineers had endlessly sought theoretical perfection, American engineers had sought practical effectiveness and then manufactured it at scale. And the result was written across the skies of Europe in the form of 28,000 Luftwaffe aircraft destroyed and air superiority so complete that by war's end Allied pilots were actually complaining about the lack of targets to shoot at. The last Luftwaffe pilot Hartmann formally interviewed in 1962 was a former major who had somehow survived 47 missions against American heavy bomber formations, and when asked specifically about the Mustang's armament, the man was quiet for a very long moment, just staring at nothing, remembering. Then he said quietly, "We called them meat grinders because that's exactly what they did to us. They ground us into meat, not with finesse, not with some kind of superior technology, but with pure volume and mechanical accuracy. 650 caliber Brownings firing together in convergence didn't leave much to bury, just pieces." The P-51 Mustang would go on to serve in Korea, its 650s proving equally effective against MiG-15 jets and ground targets. And by the time it was finally retired from frontline military service, the aircraft and its distinctive armament of 6 Browning machine guns had become absolute legend. But for those German pilots who faced them over the Reich in 1944 and 1945, they were never legend or mythology. They were simply death, delivered mechanically at 2,800 feet per second, repeated 1,880 times per aircraft, multiplied by thousands of aircraft, equaling the complete destruction of the Luftwaffe and the permanent end of German air power. Today, restored Mustangs fly at air shows around the world, their polished aluminum gleaming beautifully in the sun, their 650s silent and safely plugged, and crowds admire their graceful lines, their powerful engines, their iconic bubble canopies. But very few people standing there think about what those 6 innocent-looking gun ports in the wings once meant in combat. Each one of those ports delivered death at 800 rounds per minute, and together they delivered victory one precise burst at a time, one German fighter at a time, methodically and efficiently, until there were simply no more German fighters left to destroy. The technical specifications are public knowledge now, available to anyone with internet access. 6 Browning M250 caliber machine guns, 400 rounds for the inboard guns, 270 for the middle and outer pairs, muzzle velocity of 2,800 feet per second, rate of fire 800 rounds per minute per gun, harmonized convergence at 400 yards. Just simple numbers on a page that absolutely cannot convey the reality of what they meant. The sight of a Bf-109's wings suddenly separating from its fuselage, an FW-190 exploding into thousands of fragments, a jet-powered Me-262 tumbling to Earth, with both turbines torn completely apart by armor-piercing incendiary rounds. Those are what the numbers meant. Wilhelm Hartmann died peacefully in 1987 in California, having spent the last 40 years of his life in the country that had defeated his, and his son found his notebooks from the war years, including his detailed technical analysis of that captured Mustang. The final line of his evaluation, written in December 1944, was prophetic in its clarity. The Americans have not built a better gun. They have built a better system for delivering bullets to targets in war. This is the only innovation that truly matters. The Mustang that Hartmann examined was eventually returned to the United States, carefully restored to flying condition, and now sits in a museum in Ohio. And there's a small placard that mentions its capture and technical evaluation by the Germans, but it doesn't mention Hartmann or his team's desperate attempt to understand how such a simple weapon system could be so devastatingly effective. Museum visitors walk past casually, admiring the aircraft's beautiful lines, occasionally asking their kids about the guns, and the museum guide gives the standard simple answer: 650 caliber machine guns, very effective. And he doesn't mention that those 6 guns fundamentally changed the nature of aerial warfare, that they prove quantity, when properly applied, could absolutely defeat quality, that they turned the skies over Europe into a shooting gallery where German pilots were simply the targets. But perhaps that's fitting, because the 650s were never about glory or engineering elegance or technological superiority. They were purely about putting steel on target repeatedly and accurately until the target ceased to exist. They were tools, nothing more and nothing less, used by young men who wanted nothing more than to finish their missions and somehow go home. That most of them did eventually go home, while their German opponents did not, was testament to the brutal effectiveness of those tools. The last word belongs to an unnamed German pilot, recorded in a letter home in March 1945, just weeks before the end. They do not fight with honor or individual skill. They fight with mathematics: 6 guns, 1,800 rounds, 1 target. We are not being defeated by better pilots. We are being defeated by American multiplication tables delivered at the speed of sound. This was the reality of the 650s, not a wonder weapon, not a technological breakthrough, just a practical proven solution multiplied by American industrial might and delivered with mechanical precision across the skies of Europe. They turned the Luftwaffe from hunters into hunted, from predators into prey, from an air force into a memory, from a threat into history. 650 caliber Browning machine guns mounted in the wings of a North American P-51 Mustang, firing in perfect convergence at 400 yards, simple, effective, absolutely lethal, the American way of war written in bullets across the sky.